Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Mets Daily on the Fan Arch Network. John Saponaro here with you today and every day to talk about our New York Mets. Before we get started, we've got to say a special thank you to our friends over at Kalshi for sponsoring the video for a limited time. Use the code FANARCHBASEBALL on the Kalshi app to get $10 when you trade 10. Well, we're here on a Saturday. We're not usually here on a Saturday. I didn't expect to be here on a Saturday, but there was big news to react to, so I had to sit down so that you and I can talk all about it. At this point, you probably know it's been about 24 hours since the news dropped. Carlos Mendoza is officially out as the manager of the New York Mets. This is something that was long overdue. This was something that needed to be done. This is something that I thought should have been done a few months ago. But before we get any deeper into the conversation, let me say, if you have not followed me for a long time, I do not relish in people losing their jobs. When you do stuff like this and you comment on sports and you have a platform in sports, it's very easy to say this person should be fired, that person should be fired, that person needs to go, this person needs to get cut, this person's career is over. It's so easy to sit on a couch and say things like that. And it's part of it. I understand it. They understand it. They're professionals. They're all adults. So we don't need to apologize for it. But I do want to take just one moment to spend it on the human element here. If you follow me for a long time, you know that's a big part of how I relate to these sports. This is not MLB The Show. This is not fantasy baseball. These are human beings with real lives and real circumstances, and that part should not be ignored. So human to human, empathy being what it is, I feel bad for Carlos Mendoza. I don't know Carlos Mendoza, but it sucks to lose your job. And for that, I'm sorry. Carlos Mendoza seems like a really good dude. I don't know him. Everybody who does says he's wonderful. I'm sure that's true. And in that case, I'm sorry too. You know, he should have done better. The team should have done better by him. The organization should have put him in a better position to succeed. None of that happened. And them's the breaks when you have a job like this in Major League Baseball or in professional sports. Now that we move on from that, Carlos Mendoza is out. And like I said at the top, he needed to be out. This is a guy who, for his tenure with the Mets, has been more of a poor manager than a good manager. He had 2 seasons where he started terribly and happened to finish strong, and then he had a second season where he started amazingly and the team literally crumbled. And then when you add in the first half of this year where they start off miserably again, that's not a great track record of success. I know you look at the win-loss record and you're going to see one that's slightly over 500, and you're going to say maybe that's not the time to let go of a guy. But I think a lot of us Mets fans are in lockstep here. He had sort of lost the room. I don't know if he lost the team. You and I are not in the locker room. You and I are not in the clubhouse. We're not in the dugout. We're not on the field. So I can't say that he lost the team. But what I can say is he did lose his ability to function as a manager. This was merciful. Letting him out of this job was a kindness. He had to sit there night after night in front of the cameras, in front of the journalists, and answer questions, and he had no answers. And we could talk in a minute whether or not that was on him or not. But the bottom line is he sat there. He didn't have a lot to say. He didn't have a lot to go off of. He called losses embarrassing, and it just looked like it was over for him. He looked like a man defeated. So taking him out of this situation was a kindness. Now, look, again, this is something that I had petitioned for earlier in the season. This is something I thought came a couple months too late. I thought they should have done it sometime during the 12-game losing streak. And quite frankly, I thought that they could have fired Carlos Mendoza at the end of last season. On the final episode after the season ended of Till Mets Do Us Part, I said, I don't think they're going to fire Carlos Mendoza, but I think they could. I think they have reason to if they want to. But the problem is, I don't think they want to. And I think that was very clear when we get to June 27th of 2026. The Mets, for whatever reason, believed in Carlos Mendoza. Now, there were times last year when that team crumbled in the second half, when he was going into this season as a lame duck, when the Mets had 3 losing streaks of 7 games or more, when they were fighting for their playoff lives, when they couldn't get over the hump to win one more game or beat the Cincinnati Reds. And then when you get into the offseason and you dismantle his entire coaching staff from beneath him, yeah, there was plenty of reason to say you could just move on from Carlos Mendoza right then and there. So when I say this had to be done, I mean it should have already been done. And when you get to the fact that tonight, the Mets wind up playing a baseball game after this is all said and done, by the way. We'll talk about that in the final segment. The Mets do lose again. They've lost their 7th straight. If they kept Carlos Mendoza for tonight's game, that would have been 5 losing streaks of 7 games or more in basically one calendar year. From middle of last June to the end of this June, they would have gone through 5 losing streaks of 7 games or more. That is almost impossible to do for a roster with this level of talent, with this payroll, etc., etc., etc. Now, look, there's plenty of room to throw blame in many places. I said this on Twitter, and I stand by it. The one thing that I do not want to endure, again, keeping the human element in mind here, is that Carlos Mendoza was some kind of innocent victim in all of this, that he was some kind of fall guy for David Stearns. I've seen that word used, or that phrase. I've seen scapegoat being used, innocent bystander, and that is not true. That's the thing that's going to irk me. Again, I'm not dancing on the grave of this man's Mets job, but I fall short of being able to sit here and listen to talking heads, whether they knew him or they didn't, whether it's fans, whether it's people in the media, whether it's people with the Mets, make it sound as though he had nothing to do with this. When you have a failure of this magnitude, and the Mets are a failure on an epic level, everyone is to blame. The front office, the general manager, the president of baseball operations, whatever, the owner, the manager, the players, the coaches, the staff, everyone is to blame. That includes Carlos Mendoza. So is he the biggest share of the blame? Probably not, but I don't care because everyone is to blame. He has been a bad manager. I already outlined the reasons. And so I don't want to hear from folks that, well, Stearns just had him fall on the sword. No, man. Look, we can talk about David Stearns, and we will. And David Stearns now, he was already under a microscope. He is under a microscope tenfold now. He's got a spotlight on him and a magnifying glass and a microscope. But he's got plenty of blame. You could blame Cohen. You could blame the players, and you should. But Carlos Mendoza was not an innocent bystander in all of this. He was a bad manager for basically 2.5 years. A team that consistently underachieved. A team that, whenever met with adversity, could not get up. A team that seemed to have no accountability. I know David Stearns kind of flew in the face of that, but I don't know, man. We all watch the games. He has to say some stuff as the GM, and I'm not saying we know better, but I'm watching a team that showed very little accountability under Carlos Mendoza. So I just don't want it to be swept under the rug like, man, again, it's sad. It sucks. Sucks for him. I feel for him as a human being. But I fall short of this guy is just some innocent bystander that David Stearns allowed to take the fall for him. That is not the case. Carlos Mendoza did enough on his own merit to lose his job, and he did. And that's what happens in Major League Baseball. Speaking of David Stearns, of course, he's going to address the media after this news comes out, and he did so a few hours later. I listened to the entire press conference. There were a lot of great questions asked by people on the Mets beat, and that's because there's a lot of really talented people on the Mets beat. Laura Albanese is great. Abby Mastracco is great. Will Salmon is great. You've got Gary Cohen in the room. You've got Steve Gelbs in the room. They're going to ask their questions. There was one really dumb question by Mike Puma that, basically asking Stearns if he thought about resigning which is the most asinine waste of a question I've ever heard in my entire life, but I digress. There were a lot of other questions asked by the individuals in that room that really grilled David Stearns, and for good reason and with good cause. And he is a guy who needs to speak out on some of this stuff. And I thought early in the press conference, and ironically enough, that Puma question did come early in the press conference, I thought early on Stearns was pretty forthcoming, and Stearns seemed a bit emotional, and Stearns seemed like a guy who was being very honest, but also, controlled. And I liked the way it started. As this went on, I thought the press conference ended on a bit of a lesser note. I thought at the end he got a little defensive. I thought at the end he got a little evasive when he didn't need to be. And look, GMs and coaches and people with organizations, they're always going to do things that we call coach speak, GM speak. They can't throw certain people under the bus. They're going to evade questions. They're not going to give you, what their entire plan is. So some of those questions, wind up being a waste. You have to ask them, but you know that you're not going to get a real answer. But there were a few questions towards the end of the press conference I thought he could have answered a little bit more blatantly, a little bit more honestly, and I thought he chose not to, which I thought was a miss for him. But all in all, look, he sat there, he took the slings, he took the arrows, he even took the hard questions, and he even took the absurd questions like I already touched on. And I said this on the show 2 days ago. The Mets should probably fire David Stearns in the sense that they're not going to do it now, by the way. The Mets are not going to move on from David Stearns in season. They might when the season is over, I don't know. But when I say they should, I mean there's grounds to do it. If they wanted to, if Steve Cohen wanted to do it, on merit, David Stearns probably deserves to get fired. But much like what I said about Mendy in the last segment, I don't think that he's going to. And I don't think that he's going to for a couple of different reasons. And I already outlined them on a show earlier in the week, but I'll repeat them here if you missed it. One, continuity. The Major League Baseball is about to go into uncharted territory in this offseason. It's going to be a really long lockout, more than likely. They're going to have a really short window from when the World Series ends to when the CBA expires in December to have some semblance of an offseason where they can actually work. It's not a great time to try to make your team better for if and when the season does start, and also shop for a executive on the fly that's going to step in out of nowhere and take over your entire Major League Baseball organization from top to bottom. I just don't think that makes a lot of sense for them to do. The other part of it is the Mets have already had too many GMs or president of baseball ops in the Steve Cohen era. They've had Sandy Alderson, Jared Porter, Zach Scott, Billy Epler, and now David Stearns. I mean, Steve Cohen has only owned the team since 2021 was his first season. That's too many front office heads, too many philosophies, too many people calling the shots in too short a time. At some point, you just have to let somebody see their vision through. And of all those people, the one best equipped to see that vision through is probably David Stearns. He has a really good track record. Sandy Alderson also had a really good track record too, but obviously his track record was older. A more recent, successful resume would be a guy like David Stearns. Also, Cohen waited and waited and wanted him and waited him and waited for him and paid all this money to get him. I think you should just let him finish it out. Now, maybe not finish out the contract, right? If they play baseball in 2027 and it's a terrible year, he will still have 1 year left on his deal. And at that point, yeah, you can't let him finish the contract. But right now, I think you need to allow the vision to unfold, for better or for worse. And I know that's something a lot of Mets fans don't want to hear. I just think it's poor business. I think it's a poor business move to move on right now in this moment. Again, I'm not advocating for Stearns. I'm just telling you why they're going to do what I know they're going to do. The other part of it is David Stearns comes with people. David Stearns hired people. David Stearns installed people into his front office. And that doesn't mean that all those people automatically leave with him or you can't promote from within to a GM role or whatever. But I do think that he has brought a lot of credibility, not just himself, but with the people that he's brought into the front office. And I think the Mets organization is better for it. And I think sometimes just other podcasters have said this, other content creators in the Mets space have said this, be careful what you wish for. Because, yeah, you might move on from David Stearns, and he might make you very unhappy right now, and you might be right to feel that way. Ultimately, you might be 100% right about this. But I just don't know who else they're going to get. I don't know who they're going to get that has a better track record and a better resume and might do a better job. And I certainly, like I said before, I don't want to be fishing in that pond when the pond is really small and you don't even know where the pond ends because of this lockout. It's a terrible metaphor. I apologize. But it's just, I don't know if I want to find myself in that situation. And I know for a fact, it just feels like the Mets do not want to find themselves in that position. So, for continuity and for the sake of the lockout and for the sake of trying to have some kind of organizational philosophy carry through, I don't think there's going to be a change. So I think the best you could hope for if you're a fan is that this is a real sort of learning moment, a teachable moment for David Stearns. This is his come to Jesus moment. This is where he realizes, like, man, I thought I could apply everything I knew from growing up in New York and being successful in Milwaukee to this job and it would be cake. And it hasn't been. And I have to adjust and I have to adapt and I have to change. I think that's the first thing you have to hope. You have to hope that he is smart enough, which I think he is. But you also have to hope that he's not stuck in his ways too much, egotistical too much, which he might be, to learn and adjust. Again, he seemed emotional today. He seemed like a guy who was willing to adjust. Now we just have to see if he does it. And I think the other thing you need to see if you're a Mets fan is hire a GM. David Stearns is the president of baseball operations. That title did not exist all that long ago. It was just GM, but it is just a sort of, in a way, a ceremonial title. It's a way to elevate people who have been in those jobs, the GM job, for a long time and give them a promotion and give them more money and give them more clout. But now it's become something that is a little different from being a GM. And most organizations, I think right now, every other organization in baseball, I don't know this to be 100% true, but as far as I remember, every other organization in baseball, if they have a POBO, they also have a GM. So I think Stearns' stubbornness in the past that he didn't need a GM might be something he needs to reevaluate. He said in the press conference today it's something he is going to look at. And maybe that means behind the scenes that Steve Cohen was like, look, man, you got to hire a GM. You need somebody to deal with the day-to-day roster manipulation of the major league roster so that, they can handle minor transactions and things so that you can do the overarching view. You're still going to be the point person. You're still going to be in charge. You're still the leader. But you might need somebody to say, hey, look, Luis Robert Jr.'s got to go on the IL today, not in 2 days, not, in a week, today. And we need to tighten up some of these tinier transactions and these things that, the day-to-day stuff that a GM would be doing. But again, with Stearns taking this bird's eye view approach and this overarching approach, I think maybe you need that. So I think those are the two things you might want to see from David Stearns in the offseason if you're a Mets fan. Speaking of, baseball season is here, of course, and now you can trade every game on Kalshi. Right before I hit record, I hopped on over to the Kalshi app and I checked out some of the odds for the Mets and the Phillies today. And this is a simple one. I've tried to get creative over the last few. This one is very straightforward, and I'll tell you why. The Mets to win the game today is trading at 57 cents a share, which means $100 will get you $170. And when I look at this, I just see a team that is sort of due to win, a team that did play better in the loss last night, which we'll talk about coming up in a moment, but a team that should probably win when you look at the starting pitching matchup. Seems like Christian Scott's going to come back off the IL to pitch for the Mets, and the Phillies are going to run out a gentleman by the name of Alan Ragnall, who I have never heard of before. I got to be honest with you. I do not know who this person is prior to doing some research for this show. He's 28 years old and he has 9 career starts under his belt at the major league level. And I think he's a guy that, the Mets should handle, and the Mets might be due, and the Mets are home, and the Mets have Christian Scott coming back, and, they have Juan Soto and Bo Bichette and Francisco Lindor all in the lineup at the same time. And I did like the lineup that Andy Green put together in his first outing as manager. We'll talk about Andy Green in a second. So, it's not super scientific, but I just feel like this is a game that the Mets could win. And I think there is good value if you believe that the Mets also could win. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there is no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy into and out of your position. You already know, but for a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use the code FANARCHBASEBALL to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, trade on anything, must be 18 and over. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risks and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. We mentioned them by name for a moment. Now we dive into it just a bit. We're not going to spend too much time on these last 2 bits of information here, but Andy Green was named the interim manager of the New York Mets. He did have his first game as manager at the helm last night. It was better than some of the games with Mendoza for sure, especially in this last week. But it was a loss. The Mets lost 2-1 to the Philadelphia Phillies. But more importantly, Andy Green has been announced as the interim only. David Stern said that at the press conference. Andy Green is a guy who had 3 years and change experience as a manager earlier in the 2010s. And he's, in the 20, I think he finished in 2020. So he's a guy who has had some managerial experience, 3 or 4 years, 3.5 years with the San Diego Padres. He was not terrifically successful in that job, never won more than like 70 some odd games, but he is a guy who has experience. And I think the biggest thing is that he's been working in the Mets organization for the last several years in the player development capacity. So he is the perfect guy as the Mets start to transition from some of their veterans probably that they're going to sell off, and they try to make sure they can get everything and see everything that they need to see from these kids, whether those kids are in the long-term plans like Carson Benj and AJ Ewing, or those kids are, people that the Mets need to finally, once and for all, answer the question, what are they? Brett Beatty, Ronnie Mauricio, Mark Vientos, Francisco Alvarez, whatever. So I think he's the perfect kind of guy to step in and do this job. He's the guy that I have been pushing for, not because I think he's great, but because I think he's a steadying hand. I don't think the Mets wanted to give Kai Correa in his first stint as a manager and hand him the keys to a car that was on fire and didn't have any gas left. So I think they wanted to shield him a little bit. Obviously, the Mets weren't going to go outside of the organization here and hire Alex Cora, who doesn't want the job right now anyway. He doesn't want any job. I know there was some talk about Albert Pujols. I'm sure we'll talk about that. There was a report from, I think, John Harper about him. We'll talk about him plenty, I'm sure, in the future. And obviously, you're not going to give the job to Carlos Beltran as he is going into the Hall of Fame as a Met. And you're going to say, oh, by the way, let's muddy that and let's sully all of that goodwill by putting you in charge of a terrible, terrible baseball team in your first stint as manager after we already did you so dirty the first time around where you never should have been fired. So Andy Green just made the most sense. He's done the job before. He knows the organization. He's a good communicator. I listened to his press conference as well. He seemed like a guy who he said all the right things and kind of knew how to handle this and navigate this. And he's going to be a steward, basically. He's going to be a guy who just hangs on to the keys to the kingdom just for a couple months and lands the plane. And then the Mets will embark on a full managerial search in the offseason. And I'm sure that will include names like Alex Cora and Carlos Beltran and the aforementioned Albert Pujols as well. But for right now, it's Andy Green, and I think he's the right person to do it. I like the lineup he threw out there the first game that he was writing up the lineup card. I liked the batting order. I liked the usage of the players in certain positions. I'm sure Bo Bichette will be back out there at third base today. He wanted to get Bichette off of his feet, so he gave him a DH day. But I liked what he did. I liked the idea behind it. And I liked the fact that, he was kind of rewarded Zach Thornton, who we'll talk about in a second, with the ability to kind of stay in that game after starting off pretty poorly, 3-4 hard hit baseballs out of the first 5 batters that he faced. But then he was able to bounce back and settle in and give the Mets a nice start and put the Mets in a position to win a game. Green stuck with them. He was a little quick on the trigger after 6 innings. I think he was at like 80 pitches when he pulled them. But I also think it's a case of a kid wanting that kid to leave the game, especially the way things started. He wanted him to leave the game feeling good. And again, that's what this season, whether we like it or not, that's what this season's going to be about. You want to see what you have, but you also want to give guys the opportunity to grow and to learn. And I'm sure if Zach Thornton stays in the rotation, which I think he deserves another shot after what he did last night, that maybe they'll push him a little bit further next time. So for now, and for the rest of the season, it's going to be Andy Green as Carlos Mendoza is out. But in 2027, whether baseball is played or not, the Mets are going to embark on a search for another manager, and someone will be named the new official manager of the New York Mets. But today is not that day. And oh yeah, last but certainly not least, the Mets played a baseball game. We talked a little bit about it already. It was better, but not good enough to win. Mets lose that game. Mets had opportunities to win that game. Zach Thornton, who we talked about already, put them in a really good position to win. It looked like after the first 3 batters that he was going to pitch like 2 innings and get bombed out of the stadium. He gave up 3 hard hits in a row to Turner, Schwarber, and Harper. I think he got Real Muto, he got Bohm, I believe, and then it was Real Muto who hit the 4th hard hit ball of the inning, lined into an unbelievable play by Jared Young, diving down the first base line, saving a couple runs. And then after that, credit to the kid, he really settled in. He got a lot of double plays. He was pitching in the zone. He's got a reputation to be a strike thrower, and he was doing that. He wasn't walking guys. He was being aggressive, despite the fact that he's got okay stuff. As far as he's got very typical lefty stuff, throws 90, 92, gets to 94 on the fastball. He's got a curveball. Yeah, he's a quintessential lefty, but he's a guy who throws strikes. And he's a guy who did exactly what he needed to do, and he put the Mets in a good position to win. I mentioned Jared Young already. He had a great game defensively, also responsible for the only run the Mets were able to get. He knocked in Bo Bichette with a nice base hit. He also did end the game striking out, but you know what? Jared Young had a really good game. Jared Young kept the Mets in the game offensively and defensively, so hats off to him. And I guess the last thing to talk about is the fact that the Mets maybe win this game, if not for one of the most spectacular plays by Derek Hill that I've ever seen. Absolutely robbing Juan Soto of a home run in the bottom of the first inning. I mean, Soto gets a pitch. It's grooved. He gets all of it. He has his home run pose. The ball is going to be over the wall. The ball is over the wall. And Hill is tracking it out in right center. He leaps. The leap is perfectly timed. He's just tall enough. The reach is just good enough. I mean, he's 10 feet in the air with his glove extended over the fence and pulls back a home run that, if that ball goes out, Mets maybe win this game 3-2 or 3-1 or whatever the case may be. But it was not in the cards. And like I said on Twitter, life, death, and Scrub Jones, some guy named Scrub Jones, robbing a Mets player with the most spectacular play you've ever seen. And that's how things go for the New York Mets sometimes. We've seen it before. And unfortunately in this season, when the Mets just, even if the season's over, you just want the Mets to win games, man. And the baseball gods were not having it today. So the Mets make it 7 losses in a row. Season is over. They have admitted it. They've waved the white flag. They've already made a trade. They've already fired their manager. But I still want the team to win, man. This isn't the NFL where the worst record guarantees you the number one pick. And it isn't even the NFL where the number one pick pays dividends immediately, or it's easy to hit on a number one pick, or whatever the case may be. So I want the Mets to win. I want Juan Soto to hit home runs. I don't want him to get robbed. We've had enough misfortune this season already. I don't need to see more of that. But unfortunately, that's what we got tonight. Last night. Hopefully, today will bring a little bit better fortunes, and hopefully the Mets can get back to their winning ways, whether it matters for the 2026 season or not. I want to see it. You may disagree, but there's too many baseball games left for me to want the Mets to lose. And honestly, I wouldn't root for my team to lose anyway. That's just me. Anyway, that's going to do it for this edition of Mets Daily. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We're sitting at just over 4,000 subscribers. We would love to get to 5,000 subscribers before the end of the season. And more importantly, we would love for you to be a part of it. This is a bonus episode, so I'm not going to be with you tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday. So until next time, I'm John Saponaro. Peace.